The inquiry process is a process, and as such, any one description is not the only or the ideal model. So instead of attempting to define the inquiry process, I will discuss some important aspects of inquiry that should be supported if you want to create a successful learning environment in your classroom. We should remember that inquiry often does and should lead to the creation of new ideas, and constructively communicating those ideas within the context of a classroom environment is central to the whole inquiry process. The first step to inquiry begins with the desire to discover meaningful questions, which are inspired by genuine curiosity about real-world experiences. A question or a problem comes into focus at this stage, and the learner begins to define or describe what it is. An example of this would be, what makes a poem, or where do chickens come from, and how does an egg work, or why does the moon change shape? The next step is to refine your question through the learning process. We never fully leave one stage and go neatly into the next, so questions naturally lead to the next stage in this process, which is more of an investigation. As we investigate, we act upon a curious impulse, and this is what we call the investigation process. At this stage, the learner begins to gather information. They are researching resources, studying, crafting an experiment, observing, or interviewing, etc. The learner may rethink the question or refine their line of inquiry, or plunge down an entirely new path that the original question did not or could not anticipate. The information gathering stage becomes a self-motivating process that is wholly owned by the learner. As the student gathers more information, the learner begins to make connections, to synthesize meaning, which is sort of the creative spark that forms all new knowledge. The learner now understands the creative task of shaping significant new thoughts and ideas and theories outside of his or her prior experiences. In your classroom, at this point in the circle of inquiry, you will want your learners to share their new ideas with each other. The learners will begin to ask others about their own experiences and investigations. Shared knowledge is a community building process, and the meaning of the investigation begins to take on greater relevance in the context of the learner's society. They compare notes, discuss conclusions, and share experiences, and this is all examples of community building process in action. The final classroom step to an inquiry process is reflection, or taking the time to look back at the question, the research path, and the conclusions made. The learner steps back and considers what they have accomplished and makes observations and possibly new decisions. Has the solution been found? Do new questions come into light? What might those questions be? And so begins, again, the circle of inquiry. To foster a successful inquiry learning environment, you should try to make the following characteristics of your classroom. So there are 4 things that you want to do. So 1, your students should try to feel successful and supported and appreciated and recognized in your classroom. The second thing is that your classroom should value difference, be it difference in language, of belief or values, as well as you also want them to sort of develop a critical awareness and try to foster sort of a spirit of political consciousness, an understanding of schooling, and an awareness of their personal, family, or societal goals. The third thing to keep in mind is that learning should be seen as a process, and it should allow time or space for students to learn as well as to revise or to challenge conventional wisdoms. In the inquiry process, you don't have all the answers. That's why students are going out to find things themselves. And the final step, number 4, to creating a inquiry positive classroom is that students also need to take responsibility for their decisions. They need to initiate inquiry themselves, and they need to be self-motivated. So as a teacher, you are more like a student's coworker or a coach and a helper to help them through this process. You're also not the only person who's involved in this process. Parental involvement can really foster a more positive inquiry process in students, and students can also collaborate with other students, with teachers. They can work in other disciplines, or they can work with members of the larger community to really investigate their inquiry question. Good luck with your inquiry process. Check out the link below, and it has many examples of different inquiry units that you can use and is incredibly helpful in explaining the circle that is the inquiry process.